Okay, let's get into a bit more about you as a coach then. So, what do you think are the attributes that serve you well as a coach?
Um, I think patience is probably the biggest one. Um, I think, you know, as a coach, you're always kind of told to kind of find your niche if you really want to make it in this world. And it appears that I've stumbled across this niche of dealing with people that are notoriously difficult to deal with. Um, and I think that just comes from my ability to be patient and bite my tongue. And I mean, nobody's perfect, but I like to think that with the athletes that I coach, I know when they need to talking to and when just to kind of let things be. And so I'd say that's number one. And then number two is just um, I would like to think I'm good to be around. I think you can, like I said earlier, you could be the best technical coach in the world with the most scientific knowledge, but athletes have to enjoy being around you if you're really going to be successful for the most part. And I think I'm quite good at creating an environment where athletes like to be there. I think it's often overlooked in the throws that, especially with younger athletes, you might have athletes which are, maybe being bullied at school, or they might be in a home environment where they're not happy, and their training environment might be their sanctuary. You have to make it somewhere where they want to be and where they feel safe. And, it might be the only place where they actually feel like they have an identity.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big thing that I value, especially with the young developing athletes, is making sure that you create an environment which they enjoy and actually makes them enjoy the event. It doesn't matter what level they're at. The enjoyment should be there. And then I guess lastly, maybe I would like to think I'm not too egotistical. So I'm quite willing to take advice from other people, and for my athletes to take advice and get input from other people. I think often too many coaches get in the way of their athletes simply by being too protective. And that's something I took from my coach John Hillier in terms of taking input from other people and not being afraid of that. So I'd say that's probably it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's good for athletes athletes that you coach regularly to occasionally go and see other coaches and listen to other coaches. It's a lot of the time they hear the same story put in a slightly different way, so they might pick up or engage in it slightly differently or better. And I don't think coaches should be afraid of their athletes listening to other coaches. I think it shows confidence in your own coaching ability if you're able to do that as well.
Yeah, completely agree.
So, so what support do you have as a coach, and how important is it to have a network of like phone a friend type scenarios?
I think it's very important. I don't necessarily have as big a network now, or actually maybe I do, but I don't access it as much simply because I don't have time. But yeah, I'll definitely say when I was starting out, I regularly speak to obviously my coach John. He's still a mentor for me, and we still speak regularly. And then the likes of Sean Pickering, who always stimulates thoughts in my mind in one way or another whenever we talk. And then there's a few other people around the world who I'm in touch with either on Instagram or by email, which again has been very helpful just in terms of getting other points of views and opinions. And I think it's extremely important, especially when you're young and developing, to try and get as many points of view as possible, so you don't build a bias too strongly in one direction. I think that's very, very important.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't think you can. I mean, it's always good to have a mentor, whether they're better coaches than you or not. But if they're different and they offer different perspectives to you, then we can all learn from different people in different ways, can't we? So I think it's useful.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I don't know whether you want to call me lazy or efficient, but we can almost use other people in a way, because whether we like it or not, every coach is going to have their own bias. And if you talk to somebody regularly enough, you'll realize what their bias is.
Yeah.
And that's not supposed to be a negative thing. What it means is that you can lock into that bias and you can develop your knowledge much faster, because let's say I'm a coach and I believe that this one technical point is the most important thing, then that's the guy you want to speak to about that technical point, because he probably has more technical cues and a better understanding of that technical point than anyone else. And if there's something physical where there's a bias, then you just lock into that and you just, you go in there like a sponge and you take out as much information regarding that point. Because they've almost done all the hard work for you. They found out which cues work and which ones don't for that particular thing, or which exercises work for that particular issue. And then you just bounce off coaches, and you just, you're like a sponge taking from every single coach what their bias is, and then you can start to build a better picture for yourself and your own philosophy.
Yeah, it's. I mean, we've all nicked stuff as coaches. It's been going on since time began, I think. But it's taking all that information in and deciphering it and working out what's useful for you, isn't it? That's really positive, I think, about sharing knowledge.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
So, what do you think is the most challenging thing about coaching? And if you had a magic wand, how would you change it?
The most challenging thing about coaching is, I would say it's different depending on who I'm coaching. So for certain athletes, it would be getting them to believe in their ability. Like I can stand there all day and say, I think you can do this. Like if you really commit, but until they believe it, it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean a thing. Yeah. I always joke with my guys, if I could have like a confidence pill that I could just give some of these athletes, that would be a huge thing for me. Because I don't think some athletes believe how talented they are. Like I never believed that I was that physically talented, but when I was young, I had a ridiculous, almost delusional self-belief. I didn't care that I was short. I didn't care that I was weak. I didn't care that I was much more than the other guys. I just believed that, okay, if I have to reach this level to be competitive and achieve what I want to achieve, then I'm going to do that. Some athletes just don't have that they become too realistic too early.
Yeah.
And then they end up limiting themselves. So I think that would probably be the biggest thing for me, like challenging as a coach. Like you can write the program all day long, but getting an athlete to really believe in themselves, like that is the biggest thing in terms of getting them to take a step forward.
Yeah. What about at the other end of the spectrum to some extent is the athletes that are training beasts and they just love training, and your job then is trying to stop them from training so much and managing that whole process, because that's just as conflicting as not having the confidence, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the end goal is to produce in competition. Especially in the social media age now, there's plenty of Instagram athletes who look like they're world beaters, but then they get out on the field and they don't produce the goods. Yeah, for sure. I think the mental side of it is probably the biggest challenge for me in terms of getting athletes to put themselves in the right mindset to perform and understand what it takes to get to the level that they should be at.
Yeah.
Outside of that, I think everything. I wouldn't say it's not a challenge, but I would say that's the number one challenge for me.
And it's, I mean, again, the mental side of the sport is developmental as much as everything else is developmental. The technical, the physical. We need to teach them how to handle themselves mentally, don't we, as part of their development?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's something that we have a big issue with out here actually in Qatar. Is the boys just don't have enough exposure to competition. We have a very short window during the winter months where we can get some competitions in before it gets too hot. Especially for the younger boys who don't travel to Europe during the summer. And without that exposure, they just don't have the stress resilience in competition to perform when it matters. We see some guys that are doing some great things in training, but then just can't produce in competition. And then obviously, from the mental side of it, if you're not producing in competition, then your self-belief goes, and then your motivation goes, and it's just a snowball effect in the wrong way.
Yeah.
I agree. I think that's something that we have to develop, and we have to, and people are going to develop in their own way and at their own rate on that side of things. But for sure, it's massively important. Important.
And I think definitely in the UK, I don't know what it's been out in where you are, but I think COVID, where we've had such shortened season or very restricted season where most athletes have only had probably 3 or 4 comps maximum. Again, that mental approach, how do we approach that? Where I've got athletes that we knew were throwing well, but probably needed in a normal season would have, I don't know, 6 competitions before they got to their major competition or the biggest competition. And that's, reducing that. They haven't learned that normal process. And I think that had an impact.
For sure, 100%.
Okay, let's move on. So a lot of coaches have a philosophy that helps shape their processes. Hey, do you have a philosophy? I'm sure you do. And what is it, and how does it help you?
Yeah, like I mean, I don't want to make it sound like it's a regimented box. This is my
Yeah,
philosophy, but in general, I'm very much someone who's a fan of like coaching the person, um, especially when it comes to the elites. Like I took on some elite athletes who, yes, of course, there were physical and technical issues that needed to be resolved, but until you improve them as a person in terms of allowing them to be more optimal in terms of performance, none of that would have mattered. None of
yeah,
that would have mattered. I think, like I've said before about the mental side of it. If you have an athlete who is constantly stressed, like from social side of things and training side of things, work side of things, chances of them actually performing are very, very slim.
yeah,
So in that case, you got to look after that person first. The rest of it is all secondary. Um, you know, everyone can play spot the difference when it comes to technique, and I can give you a
yeah,
pretty good idea of where somebody should be working technically. But you got to deal with that person. You got to make sure that their life is conducive to performing well and training well. And everyone is a sample of one. Every athlete is an individual.
yeah,
And that's probably the biggest thing. I don't necessarily have a technical model. I have a few fundamental things that I believe are important, but I'm more than happy to float between ideas. I don't believe in just speaking in a matter of fact way, because the reality is in this sport that if you believe something is a fact, then I guarantee there's an athlete that's going to disprove that.
yeah,
So you just can't talk in those senses. Everything is possible in this sport. The only thing that we know for sure is that the implement has to come out at a certain speed to go a certain distance. How
yeah,
you achieve that, is up to you essentially. Of course, there's common fundamentals, but I certainly wouldn't say like I have a technical model or a really strict philosophy, other than just treating the person as an individual and treating the athlete as an individual, and then trying to make sure that everything is just pushing in the right direction towards the way they
yeah.
want to be.
Sure. I mean, I'm quite similar. I don't like technical models because I think you then coach all athletes to a technical model. I prefer to say I coach movement because movement leads to is centered around that individual. So
For sure.
I agree.
100%. I always remember my coach John talking about Arthur Rowe back in, when was it, 1960s.
Yeah.
How he used to work in the mines all day, and then he'd come outside and he'd use a pavement as a stopboard, and what did he throw? 1960s, something like this, and
Something like that. Yeah, 19 and a half ish. Yeah.
Yeah, back in the 1960s or whenever it was, and and he always tells me that his coach was a greyhound racer rather than actual. I'm not sure how true that is, but that was what he always told me, and it stuck in my head that he just understood movement, and if you'd asked about the science of throwing, he couldn't told you a thing, but he understands movement, and conservation and transfer of energy, and that's the most important thing when it comes to our event.
Yeah, I agree totally, and I think, I mean, for me, it's people that don't know the history of athletics, but when Dyson produced his first book, it was really all about movement, and I think we've got caught up in having to focus on a particular technical model, and I don't think that's probably helpful.
No, for sure.
Because as you said, everyone's an individual, so trying to fit everyone to that model is not right, and it's not easy either.
Yeah, and I think it's probably one of the few negatives of social media. I think it's given people, like the YouTube age and then now the Instagram age, is giving people massive information.
Yeah.
But then trying to sift through it is something that people need to learn to do, especially younger athletes, because they obviously are more inclined to watch the people that are throwing the furthest. So then you've got people that are 5'8", 5'9", trying to throw like Daniel Stiles or Christoph Harting, and that's just not going to work for you.
No, that's right.
I
mean, I always remember when Greg Beard was younger, and he used to go on and look for all this stuff. Luckily for me, he always used to bring that back and say, "Oh, look, I've looked at what this person's done. Do you think it'll work for us or not?" And then it's a case of deciphering what they are doing and why they're doing it, and then okay, there might be some idea there, but it might not work for you. But let's explore it and find out, and then reject it if it doesn't work.
For sure.
So I think you're right. I think social media has blown coaching. Well, not coaching, but it's blown technical modelling out the window to some extent. And there's a lot of experts out there, with very few of them being successful in the coaching world.
Yeah, true. It's true.
So, what motivates you to be a coach, and what is success as a coach for you?
I would say my motivation as a coach is probably like, I mean, it sounds kind of cheesy, but helping people.
Yeah.
Like I think I just kind of stumbled across this avenue that allowed me to do that. And I'm very lucky that, I'm able to do it. I'm also able to do it as a profession. So I'm extremely lucky. But I would say that is my main motivation is not to have, this ridiculous success where I want to coach Olympic champion, world record holder. It's more like, okay, can I help people in a way which suits me, and I think giving people an avenue to be themselves through a sport is a big thing. Like I said, I spoke to you earlier about the giving athletes this identity. Like when you take on a 12-year-old kid who doesn't really know who he is, and then you can watch him grow into a fully grown adult.
Yeah.
And where the sport kind of helped them through some rough patches, and can be that that solid fundamental thing in their life as they're developing as an adult. I think that's a big thing for me. I think that there is obviously a side of it which is very much I want to coach people to a high level, but I'd be lying if I said that the fundamental motivation for me was not just to help people, and I'm very lucky that I've stumbled across an avenue that suits me to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think all coaches would like to coach an Olympic athlete, but for me, it's those, when you see athletes get those light bulb moments when all of a sudden, boom, they get it, and the smiles on their faces, because it's not always in competition. Sometimes in training they suddenly click and they think, oh. For me, that's inspiring, and then if they can do it in competition, that's even better. So, I totally agree.
Yeah, and I think back to the influence that John Hillier, my coach, had on my life. He was almost like a second father to me.
Yeah.
And if I could get anywhere near that kind of influence on even one person, then that would be a massive achievement for me. I would say that's probably my main motivation, to try and have a positive influence and help people in the best way I can.
Yeah, I mean, same with me and Greg. I mean, we still talk every week, and now I'm helping him with his son. It's, for me, I like the fact that I've known him for 20 odd years or something ridiculous like that.
Yeah.
And actually, what you just said leads on to my next question, really. So who or what are your three biggest influences on your coaching? I assume John's going to be one.
Yeah, I'll give John top spot. So I was very lucky to get linked up with John. He was actually coaching Lauren Terra. I'm not sure if you remember her, but she was like a discus javelin instructor. Back in Jersey, and he would travel to Jersey in the summer to coach her every now and then. And I was very lucky that at the age of 12, I think it was, I was able to do a session with him. And straight away I was like, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about, and I'm going to annoy him for the next 10 years until I'm as good as I want to be. And I think he probably regretted giving me his phone number. I'll just be calling him up every 2 or 3 days, picking his brains on certain things. And, so obviously he was a huge influence on me as an athlete, but then, he was a great role model for me as a coach in terms of the level of commitment you have to have to be successful. He really, I can't think of more than maybe 1 or 2 sessions where he wasn't there when he should have been. And he missed those sessions for very good reason. He was always there, and he was always on the end of the phone whenever you needed him, no matter what, whether it was athletics related, personal life, anything, he would be there. His athletes were like family. So I'd say he would be top spot. Secondly, I'd have to say my father, in terms of just installing the principles of like work ethic, and if you want to get something, like, you got to put the work in. That whenever I remember whenever I was a kid, if I was whinging or moaning about something, he would listen to me, and he'd be like, okay, so what are you gonna do about it? And I think that's as an athlete, that's a very good principle to have. The whinging and moaning doesn't get you anywhere. You have to go out and make the changes that you have to make to get to where you want to be. And it's no different as a coach. I could moan about how difficult it is to make it as a coach, especially in a sport where there's not that much financial support. But again, it wouldn't achieve anything. So, and probably the last principle installed in me is that if you get good enough at something, people will pay you to do it. I think sometimes in athletics there's a bit of an amateur mindset where it's not universally accepted that all coaches should be paid, or that many coaches should be paid. And that's just something I never really believed. I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to put in all these years of work studying, and obviously training as an athlete first, but then studying to be a coach and developing my knowledge, then I think it's only right that you pay me for it if I can help you.
Yeah.
So I'd say that's probably the last thing that he installed in me. Outside of that, I would say there's been numerous influences, such as Besting Hafsteinson. Obviously spent a year where I was basically on most of the training camps with him and his group. And also like Anatoly Bondarchuk, was able to watch him throw, Art Venegas. I think that these guys were a huge influence on me. Derek Evely as well, from a programming standpoint. You just take little elements from all these coaches and the stuff that you think is most important, and then you kind of try and bring that back into your own philosophy and your own principles, and try and have the best influence on your athletes.
Yeah, and there's a line of learning from all these guys, isn't there? Going back, probably 40 odd years. If you look at what's come out, Art Venegas and Don Babbitt and people, there's a line of progression, and we should be trying to learn from them because they've been there and done it themselves. And why wouldn't we want to learn from them? And they might not do everything the same way as us, but the principles are very similar or the same, aren't they? So
for sure.
So what are your top 3 tips for throws coaches, would you say? I'm not sure whether that's a complete beginner or someone that's currently a throws coach, and what are your tips for improving, I suppose?
Yeah, I think number 1 would probably be what I mentioned earlier in terms of not neglecting the social aspect of it. We're humans first, athletes second, and especially as young coaches, like I said, there's a tendency to neglect that area, and that can be a massive wall. And then maybe it will take 10, 15 years for you to realize it, and by then you've missed many opportunities. So don't neglect that. Make sure you understand how to communicate with people. That is the be all and end all in this game, to be honest. Secondly, be open-minded. The amount of times I was convinced something was important, and then 3 or 4 years later I realized that it was like either not important at all, or definitely not as important as I thought it used to be. I think the last thing would just be to back yourself. I guess that kind of comes from the athlete mentality, but even in the coaching world, it's very competitive, and there will be people that doubt you and people that say things about you that might hurt your feelings. But at the end of the day, the only person whose opinion should really matter is yours and your athlete.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes, like, especially as a young coach, if you hear that so and so might have said something negative about you, it's very easy to go into your shell and try and keep everyone happy. But if you really truly believe in your ability and you believe that what you're doing is right, then back yourself and go get it done. I'm not saying you should burn bridges, but don't let somebody else keep you down just because they don't believe that you should be where you want to be.
Yeah, it's drive your own path, isn't it? Really, it's I'm sure we could name coaches that shouldn't be where they are in theory, but they've progressed to those levels because they've just done their own thing and then ended up being successful, even though maybe in their earlier years people said, "Oh, you can't do it that way."
Yeah, for sure. I think at the end of the day, one of the benefits of athletics is that it is an objective sport. The results speak for themselves.
Yeah.
And eventually, if you are a good enough coach and you're able to have an influence on enough good athletes, then you should be able to produce good results and show what you can do.
Yeah.
So I would say that's the biggest thing for me is just back yourself, and even if it doesn't take, or even if it takes longer than you believe it might, or believe it should, then stick with it. Just because it doesn't happen in the first 1 or 2 years, I was obviously very lucky that, I was able to get some good athletes in the group very early, but, there's some very, very good coaches that don't really get recognized until maybe 10, 15, 20 years of coaching.
Yeah.
So just, have your head in a place where you're ready for the long run, and just back yourself to get it done, and eventually you'll get the results.
Yeah, thanks for that.